You know, it was interesting. All those years we did all those comedy shows, and we had the networks, and over the years, hundreds of stations, maybe 1,000 stations, and we were worldwide. And of course, growing up, my comic hero, the genius, George Carlin, he was great. He came in for the first time, did an interview, really loved what we were doing. And he, by the way, of course, George drove himself everywhere. He was just like the coolest guy ever. But he came in the first time, did the first interview, loved the idea of the 24/7 comedy radio network. The next afternoon, George Carlin comes popping up the stairs, up to the studio, unannounced, with 2 box loads of every one of his CDs, specials, everything. And he said, here, I want you to take this and run it as often as you can, because I love what you guys are doing. He became a great friend over the years. This is a setup for a clip. This was the last interview I did with George. And again, he was amazing. I'll tell you one other quick George Carlin story. We were over in Vegas, and I saw where he was playing the MGM, so I called him on his cell phone, and I said, hey, George, I'm over here. We're doing a show. He said, you got to come down to the MGM and see my show. And, of course, he's selling out at the MGM and doing all this. I said, great. I said, what time's the show? And he goes, first one's at 8:30. I said, great. We'll come down. He goes, where are you staying at? And I said, we're over at the Bellagio. He goes, I'll come over and pick you up. George Carlin literally drove over in his BMW, picked us up, me and Fred Scotty and a bunch of us, picked us up, took us to his show, and then took us back to our hotel before the second show. That was the kind of guy George Carlin is. Anyway, here's my last interview with George Carlin. This is Kent Emmons, along with my partner Michael O'Shea on Comedy Island. George Carlin, the legendary George Carlin, right here on the island.
How you doing?
George, it is, one, great to have you here just because you're a legend. Two, you're a radio guy.
Oh, yeah.
You started off years ago in radio. Was that how you started with comedy? Was on the radio?
Well, no, as a kid I was funny. I was a mimic, and I knew I wanted to be a comedian. And radio seemed like a safe first step because, you know, the audience isn't right there to show their disapproval. They have to call or write. So I figured that was a safe zone to have for myself.
Oh, yeah.
George, when you started on radio and some of the funny bits you did, how did you come up with them, and how did you know how far you could push the envelope back then?
What I didn't do any comedy per se. What it was it was a relaxed enough format. It wasn't formula radio yet. It was the early top 40, and it was like, we tried to do a little of that and everything, but for the most part, you could show a little personality. You could they'd say that was Johnny Mathis. You could make a joke about that if you wanted, or you could talk about Connie Francis or whatever you were playing. I mean, it was okay. And we had a playlist that wasn't strict. You could go into the library and play things that were nice music if you wanted to. So it was very free. And the comedy came out of the moments of personality and taking risks with reading commercials. Sometimes the third job I had was in KXOL Fort Worth. That was the #1 station. And I was on the 7 to midnight, the homework shift. I answered my own phones, did dedications, and had a big homework following. And there one night I did the whole 5 hours in a British accent, just for the enjoyment of it. So it was more like that. It wasn't comedy bits. Although we had a weather tower, beep beep beep, and now to the KXOL weather tower, and he'd play the ET and would say that, and then you'd come on and you'd say that, and I would do a little bit of that Al Sleet. Eventually became an Al Sleet. I would do a little of that kind of far out guy.
Can you do a little bit of that for us here?
Hey baby, what's happening? Que pasa? Que what you call you pasa? The weather tonight is being dominated by a Canadian low, which is not to be confused with a Mexican high. There's a lot of pot jokes in the midst of an era when they didn't talk about that stuff on the radio.
Well, it was Al Sleet.
Or television even.
It was Al Sleet, the hippy-dippy weatherman.
Yeah, hippy-dippy weatherman.
Oh, my God.
And
great bit.
Yeah, he had one sponsor was Parsons Pest Control. If you have termites, fleas, and roaches, give us a call. We'll come on over and we'll kill the termites and fleas, and we'll help you smoke the roaches.
George, I want to ask, because the comedy you do is so over the top and so good and smart and edgy. Do you recall the first time you ever felt like, you know what, I'm really going to go out there and push the envelope today?
Well, it wasn't a day or a night or an appearance where it happened. I wrote all my own stuff, and in the 60s, here's you got to go back a little farther. As a kid, I was a rule breaker, a discipline problem, an authority hater, became a pot smoker at 13 in 1950, and kind of a person that defied authority all along. Got kicked out of the Air Force, the Boy Scouts, choir, the altar boys, and 3 schools, and camp. So
George, we'd like to kick you off the studio out the island right now. Can you leave?
Well, I got kicked out all of them, so I wasn't quite in the mainstream swim, you know. But I had this dream to be like Danny Kaye and Bob Hope, and that's a mainstream dream. And to follow it, you have to do that thing. You have to be a mainstream comic, mainstream television, mainstream thing, and you have to write to please people. Well, I was in that when the 60s went on, from 60 to 1970. I was in the middle of that period for me, straight looking and tie and shirt. And it lasted for that whole 10-year period, except what happened was this. I said before, at the time the hippie, let's call it the counterculture, began to be felt and heard. That was in the 60s. And during that time, in 67, the Summer of Love, I was 30 years old. The hippies were all about 20. And their parents, whom I had to work for in these clubs and shit, were 40, and I hated them. I just didn't like it. I just hated the whole establishment thing. And here comes this other culture emerging. So I was attracted to that. And I said, well, I'm going to start using my art the way these protest singers and these rock musicians are writing about issues and their feelings and stuff. I'm going to start doing my comedy like that. It took 2 years to do it, and I did it right in front of everyone. The beard grew on daytime television shows, and the hair got longer, and the clothing changed, and the subjects changed. And by the end of 1971, I was a different comedian, and I was answering to myself, not to what I thought people wanted. And that was what happened, and it happened, you know, over a period of time, so there was no magic moment.
And it turned out a lot of people agreed with you.
Yeah.
A lot of people felt the same.
Yeah, well, I found that was the period when I changed. That's when I found out I was kind of good at this, that I could really produce stuff, and that I thought a lot, and that I could save it up. And I started taking it very seriously, the writing part. And the acting thing I didn't care about anymore, because I really wasn't very good at it. I wasn't trained. And I was real good at this other thing, so I was very happy to park in the second level, you know, of my dream.
Wow.
It's great stuff. I have to tell you, it is unbelievable.
The show called Playing With Your Head, the 5th HBO show, had a piece in it called It's Not a Sport, and another one called, Losing Things, and another one about saying goodbye and saying hello. And I love those pieces. That show wasn't seen much and heard from much. I own all those shows, so it's heard now, because we licensed them back to HBO. But that, and Jammin' in New York, 1992, was another quantum jump for me. 92 is when I found my voice, my real voice, the one you know today. The strident, people think it's angry, it's not. There's a stridency, there's a theatrical kind of an intensity to it, but it's about bigger issues. That's the show where I did golf courses for the homeless. The planet is fine, the people are fucked. And these were serious pieces. It was live, and it was 6,500 people in that audience in Madison Square Garden. It was packed, not the big garden, but the theater. And it was live, and it was my hometown. It was the first show I'd done in my hometown, first HBO. So that was electric, and I looked back on that a year or two later, and I thought, well, I've changed. That's a new voice. I found a new level and voice for myself. And I was older, so my files were much richer than by that time.
Great story.
We have had George Carlin. George, I cannot thank you enough for being here.
This is I love talking about comedy. I love talking about myself.
Do you have a favorite joke?
No, but I got a nice one I liked.
What is your favorite joke?
Well, it's not like you're not going to use this.
Yeah, we are.
But it's not really bad, especially if you grew up in West Harlem like I did, you know, and love black culture. 2 black guys are at a car lot. And the man comes, it's a Cadillac lot. It happens, there's the stereotype that people might object to. But anyway, and the other one's coming, by the way. But some stereotypes are grounded in truth. That's why they become stereotypes.
Yeah, no kidding.
And they're looking at these cars and everything, and the salesman comes over and says, you thinking of buying a car? And he says, oh, we're going to buy a car. We're thinking about pussy.
Ladies and gentlemen,
So we're going to use
George Carlin on Comedy Island. George, thanks for being here. This is Kent Emmons, along with my partner in comedy, Michael O'Shea.
Thank you, George.
I
You're the
appreciate it
best.
very,
You're
very
the
much.
best.
Thanks.
Yep.